Buenos dias, MMA fans. Ariel Helwani here alongside our very own Shaun Alshatti and special guest Marc Raimondi of FoxSports.com. UFC 180 is officially in the books. Fabricio Verdum is the new UFC interim heavyweight champion. He defeated Mark Hunt tonight via flying knee KO in the second round. Guys, let's talk about that and a whole lot more. We'll start with you, Shaun. Early on, it did not look good for Fabricio. It looked like he was actually in a lot of trouble. Were you surprised he was able to regroup that quickly?
I am surprised, and it seemed like we were witnessing something special for a second. I mean, Fabricio comes in, he doesn't look himself at the beginning, and Mark Hunt just drops him right away, and it seemed like something magical was about to happen considering everything that's happened this week. I mean, it didn't end up happening, but you could feel the tension in the air in the arena during the fight.
What do you think, Mark? This feels like, I was just talking about this earlier, this feels like one of those fights where, of course, Mark Hunt lost. He's not the champion. But it almost feels like his stock doesn't really drop because no one really expected all that much out of him. He goes in there, first round looked great, second round, of course, gets caught. But I don't feel less about the guy after this. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, how could you feel less about him? This has been like such an awful few weeks for him. He had to cut almost 50 pounds. He was here at altitude. He was so, I mean, we were here all week, and we saw how miserable he was, and he just wanted to eat. He was hungry. He wanted carbs. He was tired. He was fatigued. And just to get in there and be competitive for, over a round against Verdum, who was fresh, who's been in Mexico for 2 months at altitude training. He was ready. He was fit. I mean, how can you say Mark Hunt loses any stock? I think he did about as well as anyone expected him to do it tonight.
I'm a little delirious now. It's been a long night. But off the top of my head, guys, I feel like Fabricio Verdum, since returning to the UFC, hasn't lost a round. I might be wrong here or there, but you know what I mean? That first round was the worst he's looked since returning to the UFC. Were you surprised with how he looked?
I am, because again, he just came off this fantastic win against Travis Brown, where he really showcased all of this new, opened up striking style that he's developed. And yeah, I mean, he got dropped twice, I think. I mean, one of them might have been him pulling guard. I mean, Hunt was on top of him for about 2 minutes. He lost that round pretty significantly, and then to come back with a knee, it's pretty remarkable.
After seeing what he did tonight, after seeing how the fight started, does it make you think any differently about Verdum versus Cain?
No, not any differently, because I don't think Verdum can beat Cain. So I don't think anything that happened in that first round means anything. First round was kind of weird. Verdum said in the post fight that he was a little bit nervous. He kind of became like Mr. Mexico this week. He was singing and dancing with fans, and he was speaking to them in Spanish, and he kind of took the ball when Cain got hurt and became the face of this card. And I think there were some nerves, because everyone was cheering for him, and he was the guy all week. So yeah, I think the first round was kind of indicative of that, and nothing else. I mean, I think that he's definitely improved from where he was during his first UFC run. Definitely a much improved fighter standing up. I mean, who had him winning by flying knee in the second round against Mark Hunt? So I think he'll be competitive with Cain for a little bit, but I don't think there's any heavyweight that can really stack up with Cain at this point, provided he's healthy.
That is true, and hopefully he can return sooner rather than later. Do you agree? Do you think Verdum, as good as he's looked in the UFC, just doesn't have enough for Cain Velasquez?
I mean, I wouldn't say definitively that he wouldn't be able to beat Cain. I think if they fought 10 times, Fabricio could probably beat him 3 times just because of the way the stylistic clashes. But yeah, I mean, Cain's, as Luke Rockhold told us earlier this week, Cain's just a level above everybody else. And if it ultimately may be himself that kills whatever potential he had. But when he comes back, I would favor him in that fight.
All right, let's talk about the co-main event now. Kelvin Gastelum coming in there and defeating someone like Jake Ellenberger in the first round via rear naked choke. He loves that move, but to do it in the first, especially after he started off a little slow. To me, I know Joe Rogan said to him afterwards, all right, welcome to the top 10. I'd like to think, welcome to the contender status. I feel like if you beat Jake Ellenberger like that, you should be in that discussion. Of course, not, number one contender, but he's more than just a top 10 fighter, if you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. All week, Gastelum was the favorite on paper in the sports books and on the odds, and I was thinking to myself, you can't really count out Jake Ellenberger. Who has he lost to? He's lost to Rory McDonald and Robbie Lawler, 2 of the best fighters in the world. Kelvin Gastelum is 23. Ellenberger said at Media Day, I can't even name anyone that Kelvin Gastelum has beaten. Well, I think now Jake Ellenberger can name someone that he's beaten. It's a huge win. It's the biggest win of his career. He's Mexican-American. And, we talked about Verdum kind of carrying the ball when Cain went out. Well, Gastelum was the highest profile Mexican-American on the card. He got a great reaction tonight, and he came up with the biggest win of his life and possibly the biggest fight of his life.
So let's talk about your Arizona boy, Kelvin Gastelum. What a great performance. What's his ceiling in your opinion? How far can he go?
I mean, before this fight tonight, I would have probably said something way different than, now. I mean, he showcased such incredible awareness in that fight. Just that scramble, that ending sequence, it was so lightning fast, and it almost seemed to stun Jake Ellenberger that he had his back. I mean, that was just an incredible performance. And like he said, Jake Ellenberger doesn't really lose to guys who aren't, really good. What's his ceiling? I don't know, but I would really like to see him fight some of these top guys. I'd like to see him fight, a Tyron Woodley, or even I wish a Hector Lombard didn't have a fight, because I'd like to see that too. Just something in this upper echelon, so we could see how legit this kid is at this point.
23 years old. That's
Great
crazy.
call about Woodley, by the way, because as we stand here right now, nothing's been announced for him next.
Yeah.
I love that fight. I think that fight makes a lot of sense for both guys.
I agree. I think it would really show where Kelvin Gastelum is at. We said that about this fight, and he blew through this fight. And I don't know how much of that was really helped by the Mexican. At this point, so many Mexican had won in a row that it seemed like it was almost like the first time the UFC went to Brazil, where it kept mounting and mounting. All the Brazilians kept winning, so the crowd kind of carried him. But I mean, this was just an incredible performance.
Ireland too.
Yeah, same thing, same exact thing.
All right, let's talk about Ricardo Lamas. I think a lot of people, the narrative, right, going into this fight, Bermudez 7 in a row, where does he fit in? The lack of respect, what happens next week when Edgar and Swanson fight? Here comes Ricardo Lamas, blows him away, finishes him, tremendous performance, and then Chad Mendes goes on Twitter, calls him out. I think Nick Lentz wants a piece of him too. What do you think makes sense for Lamas, especially considering the fact that he's just 2 fights removed from a title loss?
Wow. I mean, that changes the division a lot, because I think people kind of assumed that Bermudez was going to win that fight. He was a decent-sized favorite, almost 3-1. And now you have Lamas. Bermudez is one of those dark horse guys for a contender role at featherweight. And now Lamas has already fought for the belt, and he picks off Bermudez. So now Bermudez has to go back to the end of the line. And you have Lamas on a 2-fight win streak, and that division is so good. I mean, you really can't go wrong with the matchups in that division. Nick Lentz, apparently, no one wants to fight the guy. Mike Dolce was saying that to me the other day. No one want to fight him. Dolce said that Lentz offered to fill in for Cain Velasquez just to get a ranked fighter. So I'm not so sure about that. But give Lamas Lentz. I'm not in love with the idea of Lamas getting an up and coming contender type of guy.
That's why Mendes makes all the sense in the world.
It makes sense because, but he's coming off a loss.
Yeah, but it's a title loss. They don't forget.
It's a good fight. I mean, don't get me wrong. How can you argue with Ricardo Lamas against Chad Mendes? You can't go wrong with any fights in the division. And maybe if Dennis Seaver gets hurt. No, if Dennis Seaver gets hurt, Ricardo Lamas versus Conor McGregor in Boston wouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, and Lamas asked for that, but what do you think? Lamas? No.
I would throw in that I think the loser of next week's fight between Edgar and Swanson, I think that would make a lot of sense for Ricardo Lamas.
The loser?
Yeah.
But I feel like Mendes...
He's got to rebuild himself,
But Mendes is kind of in that no man's land right now as far as losing to Jose Aldo twice. So you can't put him in there against a guy who's so close to a title shot. Lamas already lost. He's not going to get another shot. It wasn't the greatest fight of all time. That's why I feel like it makes a lot of sense. Plus, stylistically, it's a great fight, too.
Yeah, that's true. I just really like the loser of the Edgar Swanson fight because it pushes that person out of contention as well. So it kind of just you help build everybody back up.
You're one of the few North American journalists, I'm pretty sure I could speak for you on this one as well, who watched the entire season of The Ultimate Fighter Latin America. So what did you think of the finals? Were you impressed with their performances and even the guys who didn't make it to the finals but were also on the card?
Yeah, I mean, you watch the show, and I think this was kind of expected. The Mexican team just pretty much dominated Team Verdum on the show, and it seems like that's kind of how it played out here. I think there is some talent there. I think, though, it is a couple years away. I mean, I feel like a lot of these guys need to show up the wrestling, and tonight was fun. It was definitely fun to watch, these fights, but they were more, loose, wild brawls back and forth. They weren't really technical fights, and so I think, the farther up they move in the divisions, it's going to be a little bit harder for them.
What do you think of the decision to stop the Leslie Smith-Jessica Eye fight because of that ear? I mean, it's just an ear, not a big deal, right?
Just an ear.
Come on, you got 2 of them.
I like both of my ears just fine the way they are. For full disclosure, we just saw Leslie Smith walk by a few minutes ago, and her coach showed us a photo of the ear right, I guess, as the doctor was stitching it up. Man, that was disgusting. That was a great stoppage, and even her corner man agreed. Good stoppage. Leslie didn't want to stop the fight. Of course, she wants to keep fighting. She's a fighter. She's tough. But, I mean, from looking at that photo, I thought it was a good stoppage before seeing that photo. After seeing the photo, I mean, you don't want to mess around with an ear. Something happens, who knows? It could be a whole Mick Foley in Germany type of deal.
Okay, before we go, we have to touch on this. This was a very fun night for MMA fans, and the world of MMA was so busy, from the UFC here in Mexico, World Series of Fighting in Tampa, and of course Bellator's big show in San Diego. Now, we were watching the UFC event. Of course, we were there. Some of us had some internet problems, but we were still there watching and trying to report on it. But guys, I'm going to put you on the spot. You know what happened in these fights. You know what happened. You may not have watched them all, but off the top of your head, who gets the MVP of the night? What performance really sticks out?
I mean, taking out Fabricio Verdum, just considering the magnitude of that fight, I mean, it seems like Will Brooks gets that. Just because Michael Chandler, his previous 2 losses, they were a little bit controversial. They were close decisions. This is an actual loss, and I mean, it was weird. I saw, I only saw the end of the fight. It was weird, but Will Brooks is legit, man. Yeah. Will Brooks looked pretty legit.
The new Bellator lightweight champion. What's your pick?
I still say Fabricio Verdum, and maybe I'm a little biased because we're in Mexico City, but just this week we just got a different look at him. We never saw this version of Fabricio Verdum before. He was so loose and charismatic, and he was making jokes, and he even called the reporters today in the post-fight cabrones. Yes. Do you know what cabrones means, Ariel?
Sort of, yes. Why don't you tell us?
I prefer not to. Okay. But the point is, he's really like he's found a new level in his career where I think he's a lot more comfortable in front of the camera, especially when he's able to speak. Obviously he speaks Portuguese. He's from Brazil, but he speaks fluent Spanish. He's the color commentator on UFC Network, and he's really found a really good niche here in Mexico. And that fight against Cain Velasquez, if they do it back here, fans love Fabricio, fans love Cain Velasquez. That could be a really, really massive fight. And this is a guy, Verdum, who, didn't make it his first time in the UFC. I know he didn't necessarily get cut. It was more of a contract dispute, but he wasn't expected to do this. And here he is. He's improved. I just love his attitude. He was so great this week, and he carried this card, and he really did the UFC a solid by carrying this card, and he made good, and he won tonight, and he beat Marc Hunt.
He deserves a bonus for just his PR skills alone for what he did this week, carrying that torch.
The way that he engaged with the Spanish-speaking media this week was really amazing, and they needed someone like that with Cain out, and I think he probably speaks a little bit better Spanish than Cain does anyway. So,
if you've listened to a Dana White press conference over the last few years, you have definitely heard him say that coming to Mexico was a no-brainer for the UFC. Well, it took them 297 events, but they finally did it. They finally held an event here in Mexico, and from all indications, sold out, great fights, some up-and-coming fighters, and Fabricio Verdum, who is Spanish-speaking, it looks like there is a future here in Mexico. So I have a feeling it will take a little less than 297 events for them to come back. We shall see. A great week here in Mexico. Thank you so much for watching our coverage all week long. We'll be back on Monday for a special MMA hour. And, of course, don't forget, big announcement from the UFC on Monday as well. We'll have coverage of that on Monday at MMAfighting.com. So do not go anywhere. The MMA train rolls along, no breaks. We appreciate you stopping by. For Shaun, Marc, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much. We'll see you later. Buenos dias, buenas noches, adios. Take care.